can go to the topic of voter ID laws. In 2012, the first phase of the Kansas voter ID law was implemented. In your opinion, was this an important law for Kansas? If yes, why? And if no, why not? And I think we are at Mr. Delaney again.
Yeah, I guess I'm a little bit of an agnostic on the voter ID law. I mean, at one level, it doesn't strike me as being unduly burdensome, assuming that everybody's had plenty of notice and plenty of opportunity to secure appropriate identification, to ask for the kind of identification that you'd have to produce at a bank in order to cast a ballot. On the other hand, this was a solution in search of a real problem. There's no indication that there's a problem with voter fraud in the state of Kansas, and in my view, this was a tactic or a technique that was set up in order to interfere with people's ability to cast votes in this election cycle. If this had been done now with an idea that it'd be phased in over 2 or 4 years and be a requirement down the road so that everybody had plenty of notice, I'm not sure I'd feel like it was quite the scam that I believe it to be. But I think it really is intended to disenfranchise folks in this election cycle. And for that reason, I do not agree that the law should have been implemented for the 2012 election.
And Kyle Russell, Senate District 7, your take on this question.
This is another very stark difference between myself and my opponent. She is a champion of the voter ID law and supported it in the legislature. I am a champion of voters' rights and voter protection and of making voting more easy and accessible and convenient for people. And this law does just the opposite. As Mike said, there is no evidence of in-person voter fraud at the polls in the state of Kansas. Yet Crisco Bach and friends put this law through the legislature. In my opinion, there were not enough people in either party who were having the courage to stand up and say that this is disenfranchising voters. I knocked on the door of a 92-year-old woman who has Parkinson's disease a couple of weekends ago, and she was not planning to vote this year. She doesn't, watch TV. She doesn't get on the internet. She doesn't have a photo ID, hasn't had a photo ID for years, but she gets her son to take her to the polls and vote. That's one of the few times she gets out of the house. I told her about advanced voting. She didn't know about it. This is somebody who would have been completely disenfranchised if I hadn't happened to go to her house and talk to her son, who happened to be in the driveway checking on her. He lives about 3 blocks away. How many of those people are there in Kansas? I would gather that one is too many, and this law ought to go out the window.
Lisa, could you address this question of voter ID laws?
I also feel like this is legislating a problem that does not exist in our state. And of course, yes, we all want those who are voting to be qualified to vote and citizens and all those kinds of things that sometimes are discussed. But the reality is that we do not want to discourage participation in our democracy. And I am concerned about seniors. I'm concerned about individuals who are on the lower end of the income spectrum, who may not have a car, so they do not have a driver's license. And with all of the problems that we've had at the License Bureau with the issues that they've gone through with their system upgrade, if we'll call it that, I really feel that this has in some ways been onerous for people to go through these steps, particularly if they're seniors, if they have health problems. And I have been encouraged in some counties, like Douglas County, I'll use as an example. They have been a little bit more liberal and have allowed people to use things like utility bills or documentation from Medicare in order to establish their address and their identity if they don't have a photo ID on them. And I think that the point should be to facilitate participation in the democracy, not disenfranchising people, because the intent clearly was not just to ensure that voters were who they say they were, but to skew who can vote, and that's not what we want in our country. We should be encouraging everyone who is a citizen and who can vote to vote.
And Mr. Green, your same take on this question of voter ID law.
Right. I also believe that the voter ID law is unnecessary burden on our citizens and just interfering with the right to vote, and I think it should be repealed.
Thank you. Now,